All right. So, welcome everyone. Welcome into Our Future is on the Ballot. This is a webinar. We'll be learning about the New York State ballot measures for 2021. So again, thank you everyone that's attending right now live. Thank you to everyone that's watching this on the rewatch. So tonight, this is a discussion of four of the constitutional amendment proposals that will be on our ballots and their pros and cons. First, the redistricting changes amendment. Second, the environmental rights amendment. Third, allow for no excuse absentee voting amendment. And fourth, allow for same day voter registration amendment. There is a fifth proposal relating to the New York City Civil Court, which will not affect voters in Western New York. So for tonight, I am here to introduce our wonderful moderator and panelists. My name is Dr. RJ Hawk, and I work at Voice Buffalo, and I'm also an adjunct professor in the political science department at the University of Buffalo. First, I will present the moderator, and then each panel broken up into the topics they will be discussing. At the end, I'll make a few final comments before handing it off to our moderator. So first, it's my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Wilson, the Deputy Director of the League of Women Voters of New York State. She'll serve as our moderator tonight. Jennifer serves as the League's in-house lobbyist, policy analyst, and communications representative. Since joining the League in 2015, she's helped to advocate for the passage of important voting reforms, including early voting, primary consolidation, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, and voter registration modernization. Before coming to the League, Jennifer served as the Deputy Regional Director for the Albany office of the Senator Charles Schumer. So thank you, Jennifer, for being with us tonight. And now I'll introduce our first panel, which we've broken up our ballot proposals into a couple different groups and grouped the voting reforms together. But first, our first topic of the night is the environment. And this will be with Sarah Dance and Hannah Glabelnick. So Sarah is a community activist and NAACP Environmental Justice Chair. She's a longtime member of Mount Olive Baptist Church and served on the trustee and marketing ministry. She's an employee of HSBC Bank USA for over 25 years. Sarah has been married to her husband George for over 30 years. She was born in Buffalo and grew up on the east side during a time when the rule was, it takes a village to raise a child, a village that has always been family, friends, and community. Sarah believes in helping others see the best in themselves and taking care of our environment, as it's critical for our future generation's survival. Hannah Glabelnick is one of our youth panelists. Hannah is the student representative for the environmental ballot proposal. She's a senior at Amherst Central High School and an intern for the Buffalo Jewish Community Relations Council, as well as an intern for the Academy for Human Rights. So I'm really excited to learn more about the environmental proposal, and I'm really looking forward to our first panel with Sarah and Hannah. In terms of our second panel, this will be about both of our voting proposals that are going to be on the back of the ballot. This is with Barbara Gunderson, Maria Evan-Cho, and Hannah Brecker. So Barbara is the League of Women Voters of Buffalo, New York's Voter Service Chair. She was an elementary and middle school teacher for 41 years. When she retired and moved to Buffalo, she became interested in voting reform in New York. She is the Voter Services Chair of the League of Women Voters of Buffalo Niagara and on the SANYS Get Out the Vote Task Force, and is a member of the NAACP Civic Engagement Committee. Her daughter, son-in-law, and 3 grandchildren live in Buffalo. Maria is the junior class president at Narden Academy High School. She's a member of the varsity golf team and an all-Catholic second team golfer this year. She's also a member of Narden's orchestra, pit orchestra, jazz ensemble, and the principal bassist for Southtown Youth Orchestra, an all-area state jazz and orchestra bassist, and an all-county jazz and orchestra bassist. Her work with the League of Women Voters started about a year ago during the 2020 presidential election. She's been involved in voter service committee, including hanging door hangers, registering voters, and holding a voter registration drive at Narden. For this panel, we do have a third panelist, Hannah. So Hannah Brecker, Hannah is a self-advocate from Buffalo, New York. She's a 2017 graduate of the Self-Advocacy Association of New York State, SNY, NYSU. She is a member of Fight for Our Rights self-advocacy group locally in the statewide advocacy group Self Advocates End Police Violence. She serves on the board of directors for the ARC of Erie County. Hannah believes in speaking up for people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. So again, our second panel for voting proposals. This is really two really important proposals that have been years in the making. And so that is going to be a wonderful discussion in the middle. And finally, our third and final, but still very critical and important panel, and with a very important topic, is redistricting with Janique Curry and Petra Holness. So Janique is a community activist and member of the National Action Network. She is a passionate advocate for promoting educational excellence, social equity, and economic growth development. Mrs. Curry has worked for many years in the marginalized community, targeting the need for community building initiatives through economic empowerment. She is a graduate of Buff State College, a New York State commissioned notary public, trained as a paralegal, and is a licensed life and health insurance broker. She currently serves on the Erie County City of Buffalo Joint Certification Committee, chairs the City of Buffalo Common Council, MWBE Committee Services, and serves on the board of directors for the Buffalo Urban Development Corporation. Mrs. Curry has been married to her husband, William, since 1994 and is a proud mother. I missed something there too. I apologize. I skipped over a line. But Janique has also won a few more awards. But for time's sake, I'll abbreviate those out with no disrespect. Petra Holness is our final panelist for the night. She's our youth panelist. She was born in Harlem, New York, and raised in Newburgh, New York. She's a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and serves on the Political Action Committee. She attended Albany University in her undergraduate career, where she worked alongside New York State Assemblyman Aubrey. In this administration, she worked largely on criminal justice reform, such as bail relief, the ban of solitary confinement, and a speedy trial. Petra also worked in the New York State Senate alongside Senator Julia Salazar, working on women's rights, immigration rights, and COVID relief. Ms. Holness is now a second-year law student at the University of Buffalo School of Law. She is currently a full-time student attorney working in the Civil Rights and Transparency Clinic, where she focuses on matters involving fair housing, police accountability, and governmental transparency. So we have introduced our moderator for the night, talked about all three of our panels and the wonderful panelists that we have joining us tonight. But the one thing that I want to touch on, as I've already gone over time, and we'll be handing it quickly back off to Jennifer, is to talk about the importance of these issues and how they're related. So tonight we're talking about three separate but intertwined topics: voting reforms, redistricting, and the environment. Each person watching this has a different perspective and level of passion on these issues, but we're here to educate and inform the public on them so everyone can make informed democratic decisions come election day. If you're watching this, remember, any issue you care about or have passion for is others care about. But in order to restore our democratic republic and pass policies to address issues, we must first attend to the problems within the electoral system. Increased civics education, electoral reforms, convenience voting measures, and community collaboration are all positive steps towards improvement. However, the true change comes from the voting culture, habits, and discussions we have locally around West New York. We hope more of that can start tonight. And as such, I will hand it over to the moderator for tonight's webinar, Jennifer Wilson. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, RJ. And I think it was well worth it to go over time with that closing sentiment. I think it's so important. And yes, I'm very much looking forward to moderating tonight's panel. I am personally very familiar with these proposals, but every time I hear somebody else talk about them, I learn something new. So I'm extremely excited to learn something new tonight. And with that, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to turn it over to our first panel, Sarah and Hannah, to talk us through Proposition 2 related to clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment. Sarah and Hannah, please take it away.
Thank you, Jennifer and RJ. We are glad to be a part of this wonderful learning experience. And like you, Jennifer, I kept finding information on this. And it's like, once you get it, you thought you have it, but no, you don't. So we have a PowerPoint. If you can put up the PowerPoint, because I want everybody to see the wording that will be on the back of the ballot. Again, when you go to vote, these proposals will be on the back of the ballot. So it is important that you turn the ballot over and read all of them so that you can answer those questions.
Sarah, it's going to take me a minute to find that PowerPoint.
Okay, so we will, while you're searching, the explanation of in the environment, the proposal, it was decided upon by environmentalists, concerned citizens, and people just like you and I got together and said that we need to change the wording because of everything that's going on in the world today with the climate change. And in there, the wording that they want to get rid of is, if the assembly concurs, to change to the environmental rights of each person shall have the right to clean air and water and a healthful environment. Now they want to put that in there because, do you have the right as a person, as an individual? Yes, you do have that right, but it is not law. So we need to make it law. And it is very vague, and you can take it to your interpretation, but it is a start. And where it started from was back in, and I know we've heard this terminology, the Paris Agreement, and that's something that over 196 countries come together. They talk about climate change and how the world, and it's not just an issue for Buffalo or Cheektowaga or New York State or just the United States, but it's the whole world, because one country can't do something and the others don't. So climate change is a very word that you hear a lot about. And this law came from, and I'm not saying the proposal is stemming from all of the climate change and conversations coming out of the Paris Agreement. And there's a conference that will soon be coming up. So we want to make sure that in the Constitution, and this is just a proposal to get it there, that it states that environmental rights for each person shall have the right to clean air and water and a healthful environment. Hannah, did you want to explain a little further?
Sure, I'm trying to get the PowerPoint loaded up, but I can't. Unfortunately, I am not able to screen share as a participant. So hopefully we can get it up so that everyone can have a visual.
You should be able to do it now, Hannah.
Sorry?
I just made you a copy.
Wonderful.
Your PowerPoint, yeah.
There we go. Okay, can everyone see this? So just we had a title slide, and to show what Sarah was describing, just the exact language that is going to be removed is if the assembly concur will be replaced by this. Each person will have a right to clean air and water and a healthful environment. And what she had discussed about the Paris Agreement is all listed here. So the ballot proposal, the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment, would establish the right of each person to those things previously stated. And its purpose is to protect public health and the environment by specifically adding this right to the New York Constitution. So as Sarah was talking about, like as citizens, we have this right, but it is not law. It is not written specifically anywhere that this is our right. So some pros of, and I can zoom. There we go. Some pros are that the amendment would require state and local governments and businesses to reconsider the environment and its citizens' relationship to it in all decision making. Advocates in favor of the amendment believe it will create a mechanism for combating environmental racism and rebalancing the inequities that communities of color and low-income communities face from disproportionate
disproportionate, exposure to pollution and other environment harming practices, and that 43 states have some form of expression of environmental values in their constitution, but only Montana and Pennsylvania have actually recognized protecting environmental rights as an unchallengeable right, putting environmental rights on par with other political and civil liberties. So New York would be the third state to adopt this measure. Some cons to consider when you're voting are that the amendment's broad language could lead to complications, including frivolous lawsuits against companies with facilities cited under existing environmental rules. The amendment's general wording gives great flexibility to the New York courts to interpret and apply the provisions, and that more details regarding enforcement and definitions, duties, and obligations related to environmental rights are required after this amendment is theoretically passed, and that courts could require New York cities and counties to make extensive changes to brick and mortar facilities or to move and renovate them, and that could be called another unfunded mandate. So personally, as a youth representative, I wanted to not only represent myself on this panel, but to also reach out to some peers and get their thoughts and their concerns about the Environmental Rights Amendment. So some general comments that I've received from my peers are that this is a great idea. It's a tangible way written into law to actually help the environment. One concern was that we would need funding. Where would this funding come from? How do we ensure that businesses will comply with the amendment? And also that the environment is important because it is our home, it's how we survive, and provides us with protection. If we do not protect the environment, we are only hurting ourselves. So some questions that some peers of mine were wondering were that third con I had said was, what if this becomes an unfunded mandate? So what does that mean? So an unfunded mandate is when a state or local government must perform certain actions without any federal funding. How would these initiatives be financially supported? Is there existing law that provides these funds, or would it have to be passed? So that was another one that was listed on this as the second con, is that until the amendment is passed, there are not specific laws surrounding how these initiatives would be funded. So first it would have to be passed, and then in order for the businesses to actually comply with the amendment, there would be specific laws, and New York State court would interpret the amendment in various ways to establish how it would actually be acted upon. Would this lead to an increase in taxes? Like I previously stated, it has to do with, once the amendment is passed, the laws that are the specific laws and court interpretations that follow. Additionally, it will be on the responsibility of the companies and the businesses to financially support these, not on the individual. How would this change everyday living for us? Would there be more specific rules and regulations? So yes, there would be, but for businesses and who are following the specific rules. So like an example would be like there were the brick and mortar facilities earlier. So maybe they would have to change them so that they better comply with how we have a right to clean air and clean water. I will turn it over to Sarah to finish up the presentation.
Absolutely. And just to continue comments on the comments and questions that we have, we know that the wording is very vague, so there's no concrete definition. It'll kind of go by case scenario, case by case, but it is a start. And things change every day. Climate change, and we know that we have to change the way that we're doing things now, business, the way that we live, even personal in our personal lives, on our jobs. I know with the COVID environment, we worked at home, a lot of people, and then those people that did have to go out, we saw a difference when we shut down last March. We saw a difference in the air. So companies had to shut down and stop doing things because they didn't have employees coming to work. But then once we started to get back to what a new normal, we started to see more cars, more activity, more pollution, more litter on the ground, companies pumping out the smoke in the air. So if you're in a community where there's factories around you, again, as an individual, you have a right, but on the law, can you go to that company and say, voicing your opinion that you have, that I need you to do something to help decrease the amount of toxins that's in the air that will go into the water, that will go into our soil? That as an individual on a case-by-case basis, you will have something that you can go to. Again, the businesses, the laws are always changing, and it's up to the individual to see how each court will look at each case by case. So again, it's very loose. It's very up in the air on how things will happen. The finances, of course, the businesses will have to make a change in the way that we're doing things, but we have to do that anyway. And we just want to make sure with this proposal to be going into law that they are going in the right direction, that they're not just getting rid of toxic waste any way that they want to, that they're not just putting pollutants in the air any way that they want to, that we have a right and that we can go to the company and lawfully and legally say that they need to make a change in this. It's a lot more to it. This is a lot of beef, but I know we only have a limited amount of time. If you can go to the next slide, we want to thank some people. And there's some, like I talked about, the COP26 conference that's coming up. There's a website that you can go to find out more information. We want to thank the Western New York Youth Climate Council. Excuse me, they are very, very active and have put forth a proposal and a resolution before the Common Council so that New York State, the Buffalo, is a smart climate city. And if you go to the website, you can find out exactly what that means. And that will be a part of this law. Also, there are some additional sites that you can go to: the Department of Environmental Conservation and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation .gov. So those are some additional informations, that places where you can go, where you can get more information on this law or proposal. We thank you so much for the opportunity to find time to present a little information on this environmental proposal. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you guys so much. What an excellent coverage of. It's so funny, it's such a short amendment, and yet there is so much nuance, and I'm seeing questions come in, and they're really good questions. So I want to stay on you both for a second. The first question was about, is there any definition in this for healthful environment?
There really was no definition. It's loose, and that is one of the cons of it. There's no definition because it's up to the individual, and it is up to the court to determine what it means, and it'll mean something different in each situation.
Excellent. And then one of the first questions that came in: does this apply to lead pipes?
That is one of the main reasons why this amendment was put into force, because if you were watching the news today, they did talk about Flint, Michigan, and the problem that they have there. It is an issue and it needs to be addressed. And the only way that we can get it addressed, and it's not going to be addressed overnight. However, with the laws, that we can make people responsible and get the change that needs to be done. So absolutely. Next question.
Oh, sorry, Roman. My internet is apparently unstable.
Okay. But also, if you wanted to know if there's lead in your pipe, you can call your water department and get a free water lead testing kit. I know you've seen them if you've gone to different stores, but they will be able to provide a kit and testing for you, and you can find out how much lead is in your water. Again, the proposal is up to your interpretation, and we hope that you would investigate some of the information that we have provided for you. Again, the right to clean air, clean water. We not only think about the clean air, the clean water, but the soil. Whatever goes in the air must come down. Whatever goes into the water pipes waters our vegetables. It waters the grass that the animals eat and the meat that we eat. So we want to make sure that they're safe, and not just for us, but for our children as well.
Great, thank you so much, sir. And I apologize, my internet dropped for a second, but I still see questions coming in, but I want to make sure we get to all the panelists. So we're going to save the rest of these for the end, or Sarah and Hannah, if you want to just answer these in the Q&A, I think that's fine too. But with that, I will bid you temporarily adieu and introduce our next panelists,
Thank you.
Barbara, Maria, and Hannah. Oh, is my internet frozen? Okay, Barbara and Hannah take us through proposals 3 and 4 regarding no excuse absentee voting and removing the 10-day voter registration advance requirement. And these sound very simple, but there is actually some nuance here. So Barbara, Maria, and Hannah, play.
Okay, here we are. And we too have a PowerPoint. So if we can put that up, that would be great. There it is. Proposal number 3 is same-day voter registration. And that's just its name. That actually isn't what the proposal is doing quite yet. So there it is. Here's what the proposal does. It amends Section 5 of Article 2 of the New York Constitution. Now, right now, Article 5 says a voter has to be registered to vote at least 10 days before any election. This proposal would take that wording out, which means that the state legislature and governor could pass a law that lets voters register to vote up to and even on election day. Now, there is a tricky little bit here, which is that I don't know how many years ago, because I'm new-ish in New York State, but for some years, the actual law about voter registration has been that you have to register 25 days before an election day. So October 8th was the deadline for voter registration for this November 2nd election. When in 2018, the legislature wanted to change that, the first step was to get this 10-day language out of the Constitution. And that first step takes, I believe, 3 legislative sessions and us all voting on it. So that's why we're voting on this proposal. In order to change the New York State Constitution, citizens have to approve the change. So here's what the, let's go to the next one, the actual language of the proposal. Next slide. The proposed amendment would delete the current requirement in Article 2, Section 5, that a citizen has to be registered to vote at least 10 days before an election, and would allow the legislature to enact laws permitting a citizen to register to vote less than 10 days before an election. Shall the proposed amendment be approved? That's the language that you will see on the back of your ballot when you turn it over, so that you can find where you vote yes or no on the proposals. Next slide, please. Here are some reasons why you should vote yes. Some people think that more people will register to vote if they have more time to register. And the legislature could make a law to let people register even on the same day as an election. This is called same-day voter registration. 20 states have this now. Same-day voter registration could let more people vote, and people who have moved or been taken off the list of voters by mistake could be allowed to vote by fixing those mistakes on election day in person. So if you showed up at your polling place and were told, oh no, we don't have your name on the list, you aren't registered to vote, you could register right then and there and vote. Now here's why you should vote no. Here's what some people think. People in charge of elections could have a hard time deciding how many ballots to have at each polling site. Or some people might cheat and try to vote twice. So that's the proposal. And if Hannah and Maria can come on now. The three of us can have a little conversation about it. Right now, I still see Jennifer. I don't know if other people are seeing me.
We can see you, and Hannah and Maria, feel free to unmute yourselves.
Okay, all right, Hannah and Maria.
I can go first with me, like my opinion and a few of my friends that I talked to. I think a step closer to having same-day registration in New York State is beneficial. My friend and I did a few voter registration drives at ECC, and you go and you talk to these college students, and a lot of them are not registered and they don't want to register then. We did register a few, but a lot don't want to. But what if they change their mind? You know, what if they decide they want to last minute? That's a lot of voters who could be voting. And a lot of, if you think about the average voter, maybe they don't know about the 25-day in advance registration date. You know, I don't think it's right for someone to go and want to vote and be denied their right to vote.
Okay, Hannah, what do you think?
I also think that for people with disabilities, this is a huge milestone for all of us in the disability world, because of the fact that for so long, so many people who live in group homes cannot either afford to travel because of our staff shortage crisis, which is currently going on. And also, you know, with the fact that this would free up a lot more time for them to be able to register to vote who haven't gotten the chance to vote. So.
Yeah, and Hannah, especially I think differently abled people, you have to do so much planning in advance, and some of you have to get so much help to be able to get anything done, that to have deadlines makes your life even harder. And this is a deadline that is a lot of days before voting. And I know Hannah and Maria and I all agree that the more people who vote, the better our democracy will be. And let's make it as easy as possible for voters to use their voice and their vote to express the kind of lives they want to live in our country. And Jennifer, are there questions for us? All right.
No,
Okay.
Barbara, I think we lost Jennifer. I think her internet.
Okay.
So
Well,
I will take over
there are a
the
couple
Q&A
of questions here that Jennifer sent earlier, and
Okay.
here's one. Is it possible that the legislature can actually extend the 25-day decision deadline and make it longer? Well, I think that the intent of the State Assembly and State Senate in 2018, when they decided to try to change the language of the Constitution, was to aim for a bill that if enacted would make same-day registration a law, not just to shorten the period, but to make a law saying that people can register on the same day as they vote. And for us in Erie County, we have 37 voting sites and 9 days of early voting. And so maybe next year, when we go to vote, we'll be able to register on the same day if there's a problem with our address, or if we've moved, or if we've been removed, or if we just didn't know ahead of time that there was a problem. So thank you very much. I know Maria and Hannah and I are pretty passionate about this, but we have another proposal to talk about. There's another voting proposal, Proposal 4. So let's move on.
Excuse me, Barbara, I'm calling from the ether here. There was one question that read, in the 20 states where same-day registration is law, is there a problem with the number of ballots at stations and cheating and voting twice?
Well, okay. I'm going to say, first of all, how would I know? Okay, because I haven't even investigated in those other 20 states what the problem would be. However, I do know, because this has happened with early voting, that if it looks like any polling place is going to run out of printer paper or ink or anything, they call the Central Board of Elections office and somebody leaps in a car and zooms to that polling site with whatever is needed. So I don't think that's a problem. And Maria and Hannah, what do you think about the voter fraud, the cheating question? How would you answer that?
I would definitely have to say the cheating, you know, there's two sides to everything. There's two sides to every story. Yes, somebody could come up and cheat because of the fact that this law would be, you know, evoked. I get it. And then the other side is that for people, for older people and for disabled people, how would you know when to vote? Because there's no alarm button, there's no reminder, you know, nobody's going to tell you, hey, have you voted, you know? But I think with at the stake of our democracy right now, I think it's super important to exercise our voices, to send a message to right now what's going on in New York, to say, listen, this is not what we're doing. This is not who we are. And we deserve a free and fair election.
Okay, I think that there is very little voter fraud in the whole United States, and there are all kinds of ways that the boards of elections have to validate ballots. I think that cheating isn't a problem now in elections, and it wouldn't be then. Maria, what do you think?
As you said, 20 states already have it, and our voter fraud levels remain extremely low. So with, you know, that's almost half of the states having this, and voter fraud is still a rarity as it is. I don't think it's a major thing to worry about.
Okay, thank you. Can we go on to our next proposal? I'd like to, there it is. This is called No Excuse Absentee Voting. It's proposal 4. And I would just like to preface this by saying that as somebody who was new in New York in 2017, I was really surprised to find out that I couldn't get an absentee ballot without checking a reason box, because in California, I could get an absentee ballot by asking for it, and I could keep getting absentee ballots until I asked them to stop. So let's go to the first slide, which is, okay, here's what it does. Right now, a voter in New York State has to give a reason in order to use an absentee ballot, which is mailed to them so they can vote at home and mail the ballot in. This amendment changes the Constitution so no one needs a reason, and anyone who's a registered voter can request an absentee ballot and vote at home. Okay, and here's the language. The proposed amendment would delete from the current provision on absentee ballots the requirement that an absentee voter must be unable to appear at the polls by reason of absence from the county, or illness or physical disability, shall the proposed amendment be approved. And here is why people should vote for it. Here are some reasons why people should vote yes. More people might vote if it's easy to vote from home. Many people used absentee voting when they could during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's good to have this in place in case of another pandemic or other emergency. in New York State, before the pandemic, the last big emergency about voting was in New York City. Hurricane Sandy disrupted the election. 34 states and Washington, D.C. already have this, and fewer people would go to the polls, so fewer poll workers would be needed. And that difficulty about running out of ballots, about same-day registration wouldn't be a problem. So that's why you should vote yes. Here's why you should vote no, maybe. People might cheat. Election officials would know who is sending in the ballot, so they might know how you voted. We might have to wait longer to find out who won. It will cost counties more money. Voting at your polling place is a good way to meet other voters. And before we open it up to Hannah and Maria, I would just like to point out that election officials, if you check a box on the absentee ballot, election officials know that you're going to be out of the county on election day, or they know that you are a differently abled voter, or they know that you're ill. So, and it isn't as if they're finding out once you send your ballot in, it's opened and put in a stack with all the others and run through a machine. Anyway, thank you. And Hannah and Maria, let's talk about no excuse voting. Why do we think it's a good idea or not? Personally, I think it's a great idea, and I can hardly wait to have it. And I also think, although I'm not sure about this, that if we the citizens vote yes on this, that this will happen at the next election, the primary next June. What do you think, Maria?
I think making voting as convenient as it can be will, of course, increase voter participation. I mean, we saw an extreme turnout in our presidential election in 2020, but when you look at more local elections like Buffalo mayoral, that was over the summer, like barely anyone showed up to vote. I mean, if we want to raise those numbers, we have to make voting more convenient. I know a huge concern is voter fraud, but again, like the last proposal, a bunch of states already have this and voter fraud remains extremely low. And I was talking to my one friend from school, and to quote her, she said, voting should be as available as possible to every person. So if you just don't want to go out to the polls, that's understandable. The lines are long and they can get crazy. We all have seen some like crazy stories about polling places. So if you don't want to go, you shouldn't have to go, but you should still be able to vote.
Thank you. Hannah?
I would also have to say for the disability community, this is a huge, huge advantage for all of us, because in the last presidential election, a lot more people with disabilities had the time to vote, voted the way that they wanted to vote, and we got the end result that we needed. And just like Maria said, there were low voting frauds, low turnouts for our local races. I think that for people with disabilities, this is a huge factor for us. A lot of people who live in group homes who are not registered, they are very, very willing to vote, and they are more than happy to vote. I feel like if we reach out to all the group homes across New York State, I feel like we would get a huge voter turnout, because we are the largest minority right now in New York State, because there has been so much, I want to say more outcome. And I have heard from so many of my friends who are in the disability community that they want to be able to vote. But just like the last proposal, if this one, it's about time constraints. They have to deal with doctor's appointments. They have to deal with physical therapy appointments. They have to deal with a lot of things on their plate. And right now we're dealing with a staffing crisis, which is beyond anything that we can't control right now. So I feel like this proposal would really, really help all of us in the disability community as well.
Thank you so much. And I would just like to point out I used to vote absentee and then drop in California and drop my ballot off in the box at my polling place on election day so I could get the sticker that said I voted, because I was a teacher and I wanted to show my students. But I really valued the time I had to research what was on the ballot as I looked at the ballot in front of me. And it's hard to get your hands on a sample ballot enough before election day to be able to be thoughtful about voting. And absentee voting, when you have a ballot in front of you, is one way to be a thoughtful voter who takes time to research things. Anyway, thank you. Are there questions for us?
I don't see any yet, but why don't we give folks a second if you have a question to throw in the chat. I'm sorry, I was just seeing if Liz had texted me any questions for you all.
I have here, are there any drawbacks to increasing access to absentee voting? I think that the one on the list of cons that is actually true right now is that it does take longer to get the results of an election. And that's partly because in New York State, the law says they can't open the envelopes that the absentee ballots are in until after the polls close on election day. If they could open the envelopes and stack them up ready to go ahead of time, it would take less time. And that might be something that the legislature works on in one of the next sessions. But right now, yes, because so many people in the country voted absentee in the November 2020 election, a lot of state results came in later than we're used to having them within 24 hours. So thank you.
Great. Well, I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A, so I will thank the three of you. And it's funny, this amendment too, because even if we pass these, and I had to throw my 2 cents in here, because this is, of course, election issues is my thing, that even if we pass these are still written in state statute. So it's up to the legislature to actually change the law to open up these processes. But you guys gave great context for what it would mean to change the processes here in New York State. So thank you three all so much. And with that, we're gonna kind of go back to the beginning, because we're gonna talk about proposal 1, which is by far the most complicated, the most verbose, it's got the most stuff in there. And Janique, I do not envy you for having to explain this to everyone, but I think you're gonna do an amazing job, Janique and Petra, to take us through proposal 1 about redistricting and reapportionment. So won't you please take it away?
Sure. And can you, we have our PowerPoint. Can you throw that up for us? Okay, great. Thank you. So you can go to the next slide, right? Or am I doing that? Or are you? Okay, so I just want to talk about the what apportionment is initially and redistricting, and give you some basic facts. So reapportionment, as defined, it's actually the reallocation of seats in the House of Representatives, and that is our elected officials in Washington, D.C. And so that is what reapportionment is. Redistricting is defined as the redrawing of the line, the district boundaries where we live at, which also includes congressional, so our representatives from Washington, D.C. It also includes our state representatives, and some of our state representatives, some of you may know here, obviously State Senator Tim Kennedy, Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes, Monica Wallace, and several others. Those are the state legislators. The county commissions, that would include our Erie County Legislature. So we have Chairwoman Baskins, Howard Johnson, those are my representatives, and several others in the legislature. The City Council, which is, you know, depending on where you live, if you live in the city, the city proper of Buffalo, that would be Councilmember Pridgeon, Wingo, and others. And if you live in other parts of the county, those would be your town councils. And then it also does include school boards for those who have school boards in their districts. So this process of redistricting and reapportionment happens every 10 years, and it's based on the census data. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later and what that means in terms of citizens and who will be able to vote in all of these processes. The process needs to be, it needs to comply with the premise of one person, one vote. So someone talked a little bit earlier about, the concern over election fraud and all those things, but the whole premise of redistricting and reapportionment also lays claim to the fact that, one person represents that person in the district for when they're redrawing those lines and looking at the number of people that are in that district. And then this process, again, like I said, it's needed at every level of government. So from school board to county commissioners, state legislatures, and also our representatives in DC. Next slide, please.
So I'm just going to be speaking about just a summary of redistricting in New York. So congressional and state legislative maps will be affected by this. And in 2014, New Yorkers, they voted to establish an advisory commission for redistricting, and it would be comprised of 10 members. And this commission is, they're responsible for soliciting public input on the redistricting process and proposing maps to the state legislature for the legislature's consideration. And if the legislature rejects the map, the commission must prepare a second one for their consideration. And just like the first one, any map that they propose is subject to an up and down vote, and it can't be amended. And the upcoming redistricting cycle, 21 and 2022, will be the first time that the commission is actually operational. So there is an amendment, it's called Senate Bill 8833, that will make some modifications to the current process. And it did pass in both houses in New York last legislative session, and it would need to be voted on again this year in order to go into effect. So we spoke about some apportionment in the last slide. So that's what the bill would amend, and it basically fix the number of state senators that we have in New York. We stay at 63 right now in New York. It can be around at least 50 members, and it can be changed over years. So they just want to fix it to make sure that there's no reapportionment in the future and confusing party lines and giving one party more control over redistricting. Also, it would be affirming the total population, which is the basis for the districts. And the proposal would remove dormant language from the state constitution that would technically call for excluding non-citizens and Native Americans from the population count when the districts are drawn. And it would end prison gerrymandering, which is very important. The proposal would constitutionalize an existing statute that requires incarcerated people to be counted in their district as last residents if possible. Also, with map drawing for the 2021-2022 redistricting cycle, the deadline for the commission to report its first and second plans to the legislature would be moved by 15 to 44 days respectively. And then also it would eliminate voting procedures and map approval mechanism based on party legislative control. This one is very, very important. So currently commission procedures for approving maps change depending on whether the legislature is under control of one party or split between two parties. So S 8833 would change those and other rules related to the legislature passing final maps. And lastly, it would eliminate something called the block on border rule when drawing districts. So New York Constitution, it currently requires that towns or blocks that could be placed in multiple districts be kept together and assigned to a single district rather than divided up. So that's basically a summary of the redistricting right now in New York. And we can move on to the next slide.
Okay, so now I want to get into the purpose of the proposal, and Petra talked a lot about the genesis of where that came from, but this proposal, again, is to amend some portions of Article 3 of the New York State Constitution, and again, it relates to the way that district lines are drawn for congressional and for the state legislative offices. So what it says is that it's going to amend and repeal portions of the State Constitution Amendment, which again was adopted by the voters in 2014, as she just talked about. This is going to allow the redistricting commission to appoint 2 co-executive directors by simple majority vote without a consideration to party affiliations. And again, going towards if, one party is in control over the other party. Regardless of party affiliation, there will be 2 co-executive directors. It also would eliminate the process that's currently in place that calls for the appointment of co-executive directors and co-deputy executive directors by the same legislature. Again, should the district redistricting commission fail to appoint the co-executive directors and remove that requirement, the 2 co-executive directors of the redistricting commission be members of different political parties. So essentially, it's looking at the structure of the commission and how the commission is going to work if that goes into place. Next slide, please. So then other purposes of the proposal also include, as Petra talked about, freezing the number of state senators. Right now, we are at 63, but when the Constitution was set, it was originally set for 50, and it's increased over time to 63, and it's gone up and down. So this would make a solid number of 63 and keep it at that number. This would also, this proposal would also require the state assembly and the Senate district lines that are going to be drawn to be based on the total population of the state and require to count all residents. And we had a lot of talk when the census, when folks were out collecting data for the census, people talked about residents and non-residents and also Native Americans. This is going to make sure, this proposal is going to make sure that all persons are counted, including non-citizens and Native Americans. And then in terms of incarcerated people, gerrymandering, that's the term that people use, up here, we have a prison population because we have a plethora of prisons that surround Western New York area. And a lot of the people who come to the jails are from downstate or from other areas. They should technically be counted at their last residence where they lived, if it's in the Bronx, Brooklyn, wherever they're from, and not counted up here. Because what happens is that when they are redrawing the lines, if there is a senator in a very small district, say I don't know, Wyoming County or something, and it's a very small district that has a small number of people, the district that he represents, those lines are only supposed to represent the number of people that live in that district. If they then count those who are in prison, that obviously grows their district and that grows their base. So although those people are in jail and can't vote for them, they count them as part of that district when they're redrawing those lines. So this is this proposal would help to correct that. Next slide, please. The other things that are included in this proposal in terms of redrawing the lines would be approving congressional and state legislative districts, is to change the redistricting map procedures. And again, the commission that we talked about, that 10-party group of people from with the 2 co-executive directors to make the changes to those voting thresholds to adopt that plan. They would be able to draw the lines and submit the redistricting plan, as Petra talked about, and then it has to be implemented by the legislature. It would have to be implemented by the legislature. And right now, sorry, I lost my place. So we need to submit his redistricting plan and implement the legislation to the legislature 2 months earlier than call for under the current procedure. Because right now, the way that it's set forth is that if this cycle is going to continue right now in 2022, the time frame would be condensed to make sure it meets the election timeline and the deadlines for the election. Certainly, that means that that when they're looking at redrawing the lines, when you redraw the lines, you have to, in most voting processes, you have to get petitions, and those lines and those maps and all those things have to happen within that time frame. So there's a lot that is contained in that. If you just think about it, you think about, well, why did they draw these lines this way? And if you look at just even down, in Buffalo, downtown, the Fillmore district is actually part of the waterfront and not the downtown area, which was really more of the Ellicott district. And people may say, well, how did that happen? And again, they're looking at population and they're looking at lines, and they're also looking at who's in charge of that process. That was a local process. This is also going to remove certain restrictions on how Senate district lines are drawn, including the block the border, as she talked about, and making sure that there are no blocks on the border and that the districts stay within one district instead of being split up, as I was just talking about. And it's also going to delete certain provisions that are really probably unconstitutional that we have in place right now. Next slide, please. Petra, I think you're gonna take that one.
So the question, as it will appear on the ballot, the proposed constitutional amendment would freeze the number of state senators at 63, amend the process for counting of the state's population, delete certain provisions that violate the US Constitution, repeal and amend certain provisions for the appointment of co-executive directors of the redistricting commission, and amend the manner of drawing lines for congressional and state legislative offices. Shall the proposed amendment be approved?
Oh, next slide. So, we can take that, Petra?
Sure. So here are some pros and cons of the new proposal. So as we discussed previously, the New York state law, it will require that incarcerated individuals be counted as their last residence and not where their prison is located. And also, if the federal census fails to include like non-citizens and Native Americans, then it will be required in New York State. Also, the amendment, it will simplify voting rules and procedures, and also it removes that partisan bias for voting procedures as well. And also, the amendment moves the timeline for commission to submit their draft mapping plans, as Janique was mentioning previously. So it becomes a more condensed process, and it will be voted on in, well, this year we voted on in November. And some cons, the amendment would unfairly power the majority party by preventing the minority party from having input into the final proposed maps. So that can be a little bit problematic in New York State, especially being that the Senate has probably been Democratic for what, like 2 years, and hasn't even been that way for like 60 or 70 years. So imagine if we were to flip how we were a majority of years, that could definitely be very problematic. Also, the amendment, it repeals the special legislative voting rules in place in case one party controls both legislative houses, which is like where we're at right now. And one may see this as like favorable, but it may not always be that way, as we just discussed. And it also takes away the voting rights of minority party appointed commission members and appointing 2 executive directors. So kind of along the same theme of like just the party affiliation with the commission, and it can be problematic if it shifts in a way that is problematic for the process that we want and the outcome that we want. Also, so Section 5 provides that the commission does not, if the commission doesn't reach a decision by the 1st, its draft plans will be submitted to the legislature that can then be introduced as its own, introduce their own redistricting plans. It just kind of like flanks the whole entire process that we're going through right now, and it really undermines the commission's purpose in soliciting the public for their opinion and getting a nonpartisan kind of drawing of for redistricting. So that really concludes the our presentation. Are there any questions?
There's some good questions, and please keep the questions rolling in. The first one's from Deborah, and Deborah said that their biggest concern is about nonpartisanship with the commission drawing the lines, and does this accomplish that goal of nonpartisanship?
Petra, you want to take that? Or
you can take it.
I personally, I think it does. I think nonpartisan, there's an argument to be had on both sides of that, I think, and it's kind of difficult to answer. For me personally, I think it does. But for some people and how they feel about nonpartisan efforts, and they feel that if it's not truly nonpartisan when it's supposed to be nonpartisan, it could be problematic for some people. But for me, and my personal opinion, and that only relates to me, I feel like it does take care of it.
Okay, I know I started you with the hardest question. I'm sorry. But luckily, the next one's a little easier from Ramona. She wants to know, what are the specific portions that are considered unconstitutional right now?
Let's see. I think I knew that was going to come up, and I had some notes here, and I can't put my hands on it. I can't put my hands on it right now. Sorry about that. We just took a training. We're not experts in this. And I can't answer that question for you right now. I can't answer that.
I can, if you forgive me for stepping on you as a speaker.
Yeah.
It's everything referring to aliens in the Constitution.
Okay.
I know it's a trick question. I'm sorry. But there's a bunch of reference to aliens in our Constitution, which violates the Equal Protection Clause, and that's all got to get taken out.
Thank you.
Of course, yes, I know. This is a hard one. Okay, and then Mary Ann wants to know, how do you know if federal census hasn't counted someone? That's a hard question too.
You really don't know. You don't.
No.
People, I guess we have projections about numbers, and when the census comes, and you can compare it to whatever the projected numbers are. But there were a lot of efforts to make sure that everybody was counted in this new census, to make sure that things like this, like redistricting, we have a very favorable outcome, but you really don't know.
And I think this is more so for future protection as well. So in the next 10 years, when this happens, to make sure that these procedures and this amendment, these proposals are in place to protect that from happening.
Great. And then I don't see any new questions, but I want to ask you both a question, because this is so pertinent since redistricting is happening literally right now. The first redistricting hearing is next week in Buffalo, which is crazy. If this passes, how will this impact this round of redistricting that's happening right now?
So if this passes right now, it has to go back to the legislature for them to act on it. But there is a hearing. Is it tomorrow? I think it's tomorrow. I believe there's a hearing tomorrow, and then there's also one next week at Buffalo State College. But the Erie County Commission is meeting tomorrow, which is unfortunately the day after this meeting. But good that we could announce it. But that meeting is tomorrow in Erie County. And you can go on the erie.gov website to get all of the information about the redistricting committee, who sits on the commission, who is appointed, who the chair is. And from what I was told, I did go to the first meeting. I was anticipating, and I shared this with our committee, when I went to the first meeting down at town at ECC, I was anticipating that they were going to give me this grand idea of what the process was going to be, and we were going to maybe look at some maps and say, oh, okay, this looks good, this looks good. But really all they were looking for is feedback from the community. There were all of 3 people there. There were more staff than there were participants. They did have 2 subsequent sessions out in the suburbs, and I'm not sure how well attended those were. But essentially what was explained to me was that this commission was put together. They had their first meeting together as a group. This was their first public session. They were looking for feedback from the community, and you can email their chief of staff, which is his name is Robert Graber. That is on the Erie County website as well. And they were looking for feedback from the community at this point to direct and guide their work. Once their work is directed and guided, this meeting tomorrow, from what I understand, is going to be a replay of all the comments that they've received. And once they put those out in the public, then they're going to continue to work on redrawing the lines and looking at the legislature, the lines in Erie County. And that has to be presented to the legislature, I believe, by November. I'm getting my dates mixed up, either November 1st or November 10th. It's a 1, there's a 1 in there somewhere. So it's the 1st or the 10th. The whole process has to be complete. So there will be one more hearing after their work is complete to present the final maps.
In terms of outcomes, though, I don't think anyone can answer what that will look like because we haven't done this kind of process before. This is literally the first time that the commission will be acting in the capacity that it is. And previously, we know redistricting has been very like
Contentious.
yes. So we don't, you really don't know, especially with the public's input. You really don't know if we'll see some regression or some improvement. So we really just kind of have to wait and see to see how this proposal would play out.
Great, yeah. And I see a question in the chat, and I don't know if any panelists can answer this. Can you please remind us, do people who are currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated vote in the during the November 2nd election?
If they have registered to vote and they are not, is the term on paper, and they've fulfilled their obligation to society, they are allowed to vote as long as they have registered.
Great, thank you so much. And I don't see any other questions in the chat. I see that Terry Parks did post in there about groups are split on this, and that's fine. Everyone, I hope that this presentation really helped people understand this one because it's so complicated. Any final words from our final two speakers on this or on any of the proposals?
I just want to say that I think that folks should really make sure that they pay attention and get involved. I actually participated in a redistricting process many years ago when I was on the school board. And it was, again, you look at the number of folks that are represented across the city, and we redrew the lines at that time. And, so you're looking at how do you get these majority districts that are inclusive and, and not exclusive to certain neighborhoods. But again, it's the way we live as well. So it's kind of hard to draw around things that, make up a district. So you've got, people associate the Elmwood Village being a district. But then they also associate the West Side with being a district. So it's a little difficult, but this is a process where you can get involved and have some say in that. And I always want to encourage people to do that.
Yeah, I second that, especially like younger people. Like I know, especially when I was an undergrad at UAlbany, and now I'm pretty sure it's the same thing at UB. They purposely do things to like section us off so that our voice isn't as like expansive as it should be. So yeah, definitely young people get involved and learn about like the redistricting process in school areas, at university areas.
That is so true. Thank you both so much. If I'm just we have tech on the side and tech here. If nobody has any other questions, I'm actually going to throw a link. Oops. Sorry, excuse me. I'm going to throw a link in the chat to our nonpartisan voter guide that has all the four proposals plus the fifth as well. Yes, thank you. That we talked about this evening, with information on all of them, as well as the question exactly as it will appear on your ballot. Plus, we have this in a number of other languages as well on our voting page, and I'll throw the link to that in the chat as well. And give people just one more second for any final questions in the Q&A, or if you want to throw your question in the chat.
Jennifer, if I just could say one final thing. For those interested, you can go to the Erie County Board of Elections website and look up your sample ballot right now. I just looked up mine. You can download it as a PDF. So I learned a ton tonight about these ballot initiatives. Like, I feel way more informed about making that decision in a few weeks. If you're interested in learning more about the local races, there's still more nonpartisan information going on around the local races. We'll be having a coffee hour at Voice 9:30 on Saturday. That's targeted for youth participants again. So please, not only inform yourself about the ballot proposals, but also about the races and to vote in every race. So thank you everyone on the panel tonight.
RJ, I couldn't have said it better myself. That was an excellent ending. Thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to all the participants. And I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night.